Start a new recording here and talk about the assessment. Let's go ahead and start with the assessment for the reviews. Jessica Hightower, I really like this project, hers. I like the presentation. It doesn't fit so well on a screen, but if this was going to be something that was a long banner, I gave you guys free reign as far as sizes and what you wanted to create, and that's cool. I think this could work in its own place. Does not work too well on a screen because of its long vertical size, but it could work as some sort of a banner in many different places it could fit with this format. So I like the colors. I like the way she's using this kind of megaphone to get your attention at the top. Oh, you don't see anything? Thought I shared it. I've seen it now. Are you seeing the screen now? Welcome, Sandy. Okay, great. All right, so this is Jessica Hightower's project. I think, again, I was talking about the long format. It's really long, and that's okay. Just depends on where you're going to show it. So that might be a consideration. Think about where this is going to appear. This wouldn't be all that good. I suppose it could work on a, if you just were to scroll down, probably work a little bit better on a phone or a tablet than on a standard computer screen, because you could just scroll. But it could also work, for example, in even some place like what we were looking at earlier, right here, right where this holly thing is. So it could work. Just depends on where you're going to place it. How's it going to look? One thing with the text, I would say for body text, you probably don't want this style with the all caps and the spacing between the letters, because it just looks kind of unusual for body text. It's kind of hard to read. Works great for titles. Works really good for that. But here I would probably stick to a more standard format. And as you notice here how they advance, I would keep the bullet points in alignment. Well, I would keep the lettering, so advice would be right underneath deadlines. So what they call it is hanging punctuation. So the A, it doesn't come over here. Advice starts here. So you'd want that to indent, and that's going to look a little bit cleaner. Here we've got costs. So those two things in the body font, in the body type, would be useful. Billboard's kind of uncentered, so you got to make sure that that gets put in the middle. A lot of people had this issue. I was talking to Connie about it earlier, and I was going to plan to go over some sort of demo today at some point, maybe in part 2, where we talk about using inset margins, what we call them. So anytime that you put text inside of a box, even if it's like this banner box right here, you want to center them. You want to treat them all the same. You want to use something called inset margin. And we'll go over that a little bit later in class today. Both Illustrator has it, and so does InDesign. Photoshop, I don't think does. I could be wrong on that. I'm just not aware of how they do it. Photoshop, you use layers, so it's a little bit different anyways. So things like this, the F is capital, the P is capital, where all the others, that'd be fine if you were establishing a style, but all the others are, well, it's like a small cap kind of a thing. So, you know, I think this style works a little bit better. Anyways, it kind of fits in that space a little more. But it's like she just started doing it down here. So again, that's just craftsmanship and looking at keeping consistent. YouTube, probably just want to keep those all the same. Whatever style you go with, neither one is necessarily right or wrong. You could go with either, but I'd say this style fits in this space a little bit more. This style could work too, but I probably would go with this and just keep it consistent, because really what people see is this, like, well, why is Facebook capital? Why is Pinterest capital? Why is this one capital? And it just looks like a mistake, and it probably was a mistake. So you want to keep those as consistent as possible. And that includes really everything from capitalization to placement to spacing, really all those design elements that you're working with. Keep those consistent unless you have a really good reason to break the norm, break whatever pattern you have. So, you know, other than some of these things, I do like the presentation. I think she put some time into it. I think the typography is well chosen. It's good. I like the top. Good job, except for, you know, some of those few things I mentioned. A lot of just craftsmanship and just some work with the typography, especially in the body type. But not bad on that one. I think that one, there's a few that were some favorites. I did like Anne's. Here we can look at hers. She usually comes to class, but is not here today, it looks like. So one of the things that I was mentioning with her is that it's a little bit, you know, you want repetition. That's true, but you don't want it to be too monotonous, so too repetitive. The other thing, she could probably center these all the same. Facebook looks like it's over to the right, package over to the right, radio looks almost centered, but not quite, magazine looks centered. It's just, you need to figure out kind of a treatment for how you're going to place all your titles and follow that to the T. Once you've figured it out, once you like it, you know, follow that kind of style that you establish, pattern that you establish. So, you know, you want all of these, I would assume, centered rather than these kind of pushed off to the side. And then the other thing on this one would be thinking, well, I'm going back to when I'm saying they're a little bit too repetitive, just breaking up the colors and grouping them somehow, even breaking up the spacing so that they're grouped. I like how they're kind of uneven, like she has them, but they don't really say a whole lot. Like, for example, how could you put maybe the print media all together? Brochure, poster, billboard, magazine. So you could group all four of those. And then website, television, website interactive, YouTube, mobile, Pinterest, Facebook. You could group that. Or maybe you could group, because these are traditional, television, radio. You could group that. So always be looking for ways that you can group things or make things proximal to one another. So contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. What could we have in proximity on this page that would make it inform the piece a little bit more, make it make more sense? And I think grouping them would be one thing. You could also group them with color so that the colors aren't exactly the same. I think that, you know, it's one thing to look at this and go, all right, so we know that cons are all in yellow and pros are all in. That's not bad. That is helping. But I think we need something that's a little bit more on this one to, you know, show that these are, you know, what's together. Right now it's a little bit, because everything kind of looks the same, I'm not really sure what to look at this point. If you're, you could use color, you could use spacing to make it more proximal, certain things. There's a few things that you could do with this, for example, that could help the reader out so they don't have to work so hard when they see this, what's going on. Because really what happens when the user looks at something and has to work at it, they just lose interest and tune out usually. Unless it's content that they really, really want. And even then, the idea is to help them out, help them to get the point across a little bit faster. So on this one, I just ask yourself, even taking it from where it is right now, even from adding a little bit more organization to it, how can you help the viewer to interpret these faster, easier? So I would say the first things that come to my mind are grouping and color. Even if you kept the pros and the cons the same, green and yellow, that's fine. But maybe you change the violet a different color. They could all be cool colors. Like they could be blues and different shades of blues or different shades of violets. And grouped according to whatever media there was. But just needs something more to clear up what exactly is going on. Whoops. So otherwise, I'd say it's a good start. I like the kind of rough circles that she used and the different kind of divisions here. Those are kind of nice. Look at a couple more on the assessment. Then go into this one was a little different. Look at that one. So look at a few more in the assessment and then go into the assignment here in just a minute. So this one, they broke up into cubes, and this one has a little bit of organization to it. Maybe could use a little bit more the coloring, but we've got social media kind of here being grouped. Mobile app, billboard, poster. Not sure why those are all orange, but these two relate, but mobile app maybe not so much with these. But they did make some attempt to group them. They made some attempt to use some icons and just make it a little bit more interesting with adding some visual interest. I do like the squares, these kind of checkerboard looking squares. Those are nice. Interesting choice. Here again, it just with spacing, the distance between that headline and our body text, make sure they're all the same. You want that all the same, not jumping around. So that would be one problem. Here they're good. It looks like here just generally it could use just more leading. Like if you use the standard leading, the default leading on something like this, it tends to look too cramped. And that's what it looks like happened here. It looked really tight, those lines. Like I would add more space between those lines just a little bit. Or do something. I mean, what I would probably do is add a little bit of space between here and here. Just give us some room between this. Oops, okay. Select that. So this would have more space below this line here. So something like that, it just breaks it up a little bit. And then you're breaking up advantages and disadvantages. Or, you could see what it looks like if it had, I don't know that, maybe I'm looking at it now. I don't know if it needs more leading. It feels tight. And I think that all you would have to do is probably add leading to this one line between these two sections. And that would probably do it. I'd probably have to experiment with that a little bit too. try some things that would work. It's a little bit better up toward the top, but you can see a lot more of these inconsistencies going on down here, especially at the bottom. Even here, there's a lot more room below this than there is on this one. So just some basic type stuff, but I like their presentation. I thought it was interesting with the different squares. So it's kind of a good take on this one. Unique take on that one, I would say. Look at this one. So this one could use some sort of, looks again, a lot of, looks a little bit disjointed, like it's just got a lot of text on the page, and it could use more grouping, so more of the proximity. I guess that just crashed. So we've seen this before, just more proximity with some of these so that they look like they have more organization to them. Right now, if they're just kind of placed on the page, scattered about the page, it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on. It just kind of looks like just a lot of randomness and cacophony, and you know, it's really hard to read and try to look at and figure out. The different color text is not really helping. I like she tried to just stay basic and just tried to keep it clean with just text, and it's a nice font. I like the font, but it's just the way that I think everything is placed. Like maybe if it was, again, if we could do some grouping and get these different areas closer together and we kind of move them so that we see some more white space, that could really help in this instance. Again, to looking at the baselines and how those align, we've got that going on here in some places, but we're off on the baseline here and we're off here. And what I'd say here is just make sure you pick a style and stay with it. You know, this kind of does look a little bit interesting. I kind of like it. It could work. But, you know, this style here where they all line up could also work. Neither one of them's wrong, but you just, again, pick a strategy and stay with it. Pick a pattern and stay with that pattern. Oh, you were going for random. Okay. Yeah, probably random is not what you want for infographics 99% of the time, unless that's a goal. But really random, people don't put things together with random. You know, you have to help, you know, make sense of the piece. So things that you could do, adding icons could help, but it might be, it might make things more cacophony, mix up random. So you might not, you know, might make it look more busy. So maybe you don't want to do that. But that's one idea. Maybe that could work if you were to use icons. But I like that you did keep it with just text. But really, I think that, again, the main thing that I would do here, I see that you did pros and cons and red and green, and that's good. I mean, it makes sense, but it's almost like so much green and red, it's kind of looking overboard, like it got Christmas on us all of a sudden, you know? Maybe what you could do is maybe put a little icon that's green. You know, it's a green light, even if it's just a circle, green light and a red light. You could maybe put a circle next to it, just small right over here. You could make a stoplight, make it like a little stoplight and put a traffic signal stop and go if you want. Just many different things you could do. So it's a good idea, but the way the color's used, it's just a little bit much. It's like too much of the red and green going on right now. So we've got grouping and you've got color again, color that you could work with. What else might you work with? What else would you say might make more sense of this piece? Anything else come to mind? Anyone can chime in on this one. 2 columns. I don't know. I kind of like your presentation here as far as the columns go. I mean, the columns could work, but that's a whole other approach. I think you've got this approach, and I think it could work. So, what if you're going to stick with this approach? Any other ideas, maybe? I think one thing you could do is put below. So okay. I think I see what you mean. Let me actually open this one. I'll see if I can get this. I probably will not have the font, and I'll probably not have. Well, I don't. But, what if you did even something like this? So if you're going to go random, maybe we group those kind of like this. So it's kind of weird. It doesn't want to let me grab these without grabbing the background. But good luck. This is I'm using the old Illustrator, so it's going to get weird on me. So, maybe you want to stay with that diagonal, but maybe not. Maybe you want to do something that's like this. So, like, you got your main thing and your main medium, and then you've got kind of orbiting around it. On one side, you've got the cons, and on the other side, you've got the pros. And this is a little more organized, but if we, that's, let's try to do something here. Pinterest, let's for example group social media, and then we'll group print. Facebook. So a lot of this, I think if you put the above and below, it's definitely, we group this with the positives, the pros. Now, if you're going for a certain style, like earlier how I said you should always have the same leading. Normally you should, but if you are going for random, and maybe that's part of the plan, you can have these kind of floating, and that might work in that case. But I think, even if your goal is to stay random, you still have to kind of mimic it, not necessarily really be random, but make it look random. So like here, I'm just grouping it differently. So the proximity is different, and I can group it so that things line up. Or maybe if I'm going for more random, we could just, we could do things like this. We could float things like so they look like they're kind of floating and hovering in space, and maybe that's the goal. And if that's the goal, if that's what we want it to look like, then you don't necessarily want them to have the same leading and line up. And they kind of look like a tag cloud. Have you ever seen one of those on the web? So they kind of take that form a little. So that's one thing. The reds would group well together, and the greens would group well together, or something like this. So that would be a good grouping opportunity, I think. And we can do some kind of different stuff. Make it look random, but not totally be random. And now we've got, hopefully you can see, since we've grouped things and we're bringing them together a little bit more. I don't want any confusion here, so I might move that over here. And if we're going for that floaty feeling, I think we're getting there a little bit. So now we've got these four: television and radio are probably there's not necessarily a way to group all of these, but these might work. Mobile app, we can go radio, television, phone, I guess. That could be a group. So really the design principle that you're looking at in this that would really help this read is the whole idea of proximity. So we're just making certain things more proximal. And print. And web. You know what? I want these two together, mobile app and web interactive. So here, you see how this makes a little bit more, just slightly, the way that those are grouped together with the reds and greens just slightly makes a little bit more sense than this. Not only that, but there's a lot more of them. So that all that is that principle of proximity: contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. So we're putting these colors in proximity, so the pros in proximity to one another. And we're also putting like the basic groups in proximity to one another. So this actually shouldn't be, this should actually be here. So now these are in a group. Can make them look more floaty and even put a space background in the back or something might be cool. But my point being is if you group them, now we have social media kind of together. And this isn't going to look quite as much if we have our white space and we group things accordingly. I mean, it'll take too long to group all of these, but just simply, this could work, I think, with what you have, and without adding icons or anything like that, it could work. Yeah, I think just through proximity, it would come together pretty well. And since this didn't have a size limitation, you could always just go in and, yeah, it has a random feel, but it's not actually random. Exactly. Yep. So here, let's say we want more space. Maybe just extend that out. So we've kind of grouped these now based on their function. And I have all of the, just so it's easier to follow, we can put all of the titles so that they're on one line. And we can have these, so the negatives are always above. And actually what I'd rather do is probably put the negatives below, but you know, it's that this could possibly work too. It's not like it's really urgent that that has to happen, but the negatives could probably be up above as well. I like that floating look. I think that works, but you just need to give it ample space between these groups, and I think now you can see how they kind of fit together a little bit more if we do that. It's like this group, this group, this group, and you know, you might have to do some massaging of those elements in order to get them in the right places, but again, I don't want to take too much more time, but I'll get a few things here in place. So they can kind of hover and float around, and that's fine if they're within reason, but I probably wouldn't want to do that either, because which does that go with? It's reasonably grouped. So it has that look of floating, hovering. Yes, we're breaking the rules. Yes, it's got different leading everywhere, which normally you wouldn't, but on a project like this, you know, let's say I do add some space in the background, outer space, just for fun, especially because a lot of media is sometimes represented that way, especially online media. So you could easily do something fun with outer space and circuits or something in the background that would work for this. But I haven't really grouped this very well up here. But you know, hopefully you see the point, that proximity, and dividing that up into groups. Now suddenly, you know, you can look at this and it's not overwhelming to look at. Guess we don't need that. Well, it's a little bit nicer. Could go really anywhere. Could go in the center. That'd be kind of a typical place for it, but doesn't have to either. So anyway, hopefully that gives you some more idea on this. Then we've got a big hole over here, I realize, but mainly my point being just try to think on this one, especially just think about elements that you can make proximal to one another. How can you group these to make it so that it makes more sense? So now we've got kind of 4 different areas, which maybe we want, maybe not, but at least right now with the grouping, things are just much more, they just seem to make a little bit more sense. I hope you're starting to see that they're coming together a little bit more. You know, really, if we wanted to have these below, I don't know that that's really going to throw us too much. It's the fact that they're just together with one another. So I was kind of hung up on that earlier, but sometimes I do get hung up on things and then realize as I'm working with it, it's like, well, it actually doesn't really matter that much. So when I was saying the reds should always be above, normally those are good conventions to stick with. But as long as they're approximations to one another, I might not need to worry about that. And my only way to know sometimes is to look at what I put together here, following that rule, and look up here. It's like, well, they don't necessarily always need to. We can perfectly well read that and that. I don't want them colliding into one another, I don't think. I want to keep that leading reasonably, like you can have them float a little bit, but kind of the same. Depends on that look that you're going for, I think. I think if you do it enough and exaggerate it enough, then you'll know it's not a mistake. Even though it's unusual, you'll know it's intended. So I almost, for some reason, like this kind of more off to the side placement for some reason. If we're floating, maybe we could even do it like a sideways. Something different that kind of suggests that we're hovering. It's hard to work with this because it's just this version of Illustrator wants to not do this quite right. All right, so I'm kind of liking this. Maybe something like so. We run it up the side. Don't necessarily need that much of a gap. So anyways, so we can still see now it's still, you know, we've got these different groups, but we still have these distinct groups. Kind of like some distance there. So anyway, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense and helps in terms of you know, other things we could do. Gives you some ideas anyway. And I want to look at one more thing and then we'll move on. So I kind of like the floating feeling. I don't like the really organized feeling here. You know, anytime you tilt text, you're making it a little bit less readable. So I don't think I'd go that route, but it wouldn't necessarily be wrong if you did. I just do so with caution. Anytime you tilt text, it's going to be harder to read, but if it's only 1 or 2, 3 words, and it makes it worth it for that whole, maybe you're going for random or spacey or kind of, well, floating effect, you know, maybe it's worth it to do that. So anyhow, all right, I won't work anymore on that, but moving on. Grouping and proximity, I think a lot of people could work with that a little bit more. Even this one, something to call attention to the different areas. For example, mobile app, YouTube, radio. Even if color was used, even if we used a different shade of yellow, shades and tints of yellow, that could work. But you need more to distinguish, I think, the different sections. Maybe even if it was just the star and that was the only thing that you changed as far as color goes. Because color is a great way of grouping as well. Grouping and saying these are related. So it's like, or these are different. If website static is different from poster, make this a different shade of yellow, and all of a sudden it's like that's a visual cue to the user that something's happening here that's slightly different than this. Now it's a different box, it's in a different space, but still it's like, think of the ways that you can help them out even more. By having all of these the same, it's really, I mean, I can get what's going on, but it's a little bit harder. You could help the viewer a little bit more, for example, by just, even if you wanted to stick with that yellow on black, or yellow on black monochromatic, you could do that. And then it wouldn't have too much crazy color going on. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of crazy color. Think of the tints and shades and how you might just add more white to that yellow, add more black or gray to that yellow. And then you'd have something that will still be monochromatic, but it'll also distinguish these different sections a little bit more. And the white's fine, but white text, that's all fine, but maybe think of something like the title and the star, or even just the star. That will help with the visual cue, because right now that big star doesn't really do a whole lot. It doesn't do as much as it could. So color would be one thing. I'd also be careful, like when things align like this, the stars, you notice how your eye just follows them right down, just goes off the page. Probably stagger those a little bit more so it doesn't align too much, and then send this shooting off the page right here. Because my inclination when I look at this is to just want to follow these right down here and forget about these. And these, I just want to go. So I might consider placement on those stars, like stagger them back and forth a little bit. And again, if you wanted to say that some of them were similar, consider it that way by aligning those stars so some of them went in a diagonal alignment. That could get your point across as well. So they've got that star background that I was just talking about. That's kind of cool. I like it. So I like that concept. A few things in the text, the typography, I was looking at some of those. I think it works pretty well. You've got some widows and orphans to worry about, these single one line of type, that always looks bad. So you want to always avoid just one word on one line. So you got a lot of those, and it's really easy to remedy in a project like this. So you can use tracking, but really a lot of times you can just use fewer words, adjust the words, or even adjust the length of the boxes a little bit. Sometimes that can be done because you're doing that anyways. Like these look shorter here than some of these. So a few things you can consider, but avoid those single words on one single line. Looks like you can tell like a big old space, and not in a good way, just at the end of the line right here. Even the mail, probably not ideal. Many people do not like receiving offers in the mail, and they think it's annoying. I would rather see that than here, because it would just fill up that space, that white space, or get rid of it. Many people don't like junk mail, and that would shorten that line so you could fit it all in one line. So you could either add words or subtract words to avoid orphans and widows. That's probably my favorite way to remedy those situations when we have control of that. Sometimes you're working with writers that won't really go for that. and you've got to run any sort of text change through the writer, and it has to go back to them, then come back, and it seems like it's hardly worth it sometimes. So, but in class and in a lot of projects in real life, you can just actually add words and take words out, so long as it means the same thing. Again, it depends on the project you're working on, the team you're working with, but you're allowed to do it in this class, for example. So always avoid, though, those one word on a whole line like that. Widows or orphans, there's some debate about what is what. I won't even go into that one, but they call them either or. Widows and orphans, they're a single word on one single line at the end here. The most recent saying that I've heard is that this is a widow because it comes at the end. Widow at the end of the life, and an orphan at the beginning. So if it started at the beginning, the top of the column, it would be an orphan. But there's some debate about what's a widow and an orphan. Either way, you just don't want those big old ugly holes in your typography, because it just, your eye tends to go to it, and it just looks overall more sloppy than it should. So you'd want to avoid that. Really short lines compared to really long ones. A lot of users, and cheaper. I mean, you can write whatever you want. Even filling out the rest of that line could make sense in this case. So a lot of users and cheaper. I don't quite make much sense of that sentence. So a lot of users and cheaper for online use or something like that. You can just fill in that sentence. Facebook doesn't cost anything, or something to span that line more across this. So things like that. Just, I mean, not just how it looks in terms of the typography, but even consider what you're saying in here. And I think, as long as they go most of the way across, as long as the lines go, these are fine. Because we're typically used to seeing that. But ideally, if you got everything really close, like in this, like you did here, and here, that's pretty close. This is good. No, this is okay. So it'll just look a lot cleaner if you pay attention to that. Like, it'll look more professional if you can. Again, it goes back to managing that white space, and it's white space within the body text and essence here. Avoid those widows and orphans. But yeah, I like how she has the background here and kind of the concept with the stars. I like, but just a few things to consider to improve on that one. All right, we're pretty much ready to take a break on this one. Look at this one really quick. Got quite a few pros and cons on this. Kind of neat. I liked how they grouped it. I liked how they did the color. And I might say for the main thing that they might have could have done some sort of treatment to make magazine, brochure, poster, those main media types a little bit more, make it stand out. Because let's say I'm a customer and I'm thinking about website interactive. Well, where do I see that? It's like I have to look at this whole thing to find, oh, there it is, website interactive. So that's one thing that's here. The other thing, which we'll talk about when we get back, and we'll see this again, text bumping into the sides. We're not properly establishing an inset margin on a lot of these. So we're going to go over that when we get back. But why don't we for now, we'll just take a 10-minute break. And go over the assignment. Let me get back. Wait, 10 minutes, okay. All right, we are back. I'm gonna have to tend to something in just a minute, but let's go ahead and continue for now. All right, can everybody hear me, see my screen? Let me know if not. I'll go in here to, I'm just on this website, Lorem Ipsum. I'm just gonna grab a bunch of text. We're gonna do, like I said previously, we're gonna do area boxes. So text box, you can take this rectangle, for example. So it's just an area text box, and you get to that in Illustrator. InDesign has a really similar feature, but you access it different. It's just called inset margin is what we're after. So here I'll take any box, any shape that I want, and I can just click on it. I got my lorem ipsum text, and then I can paste in here. I can click on, let's do another one here. Now we can, maybe I'll make that larger. Let's say, I don't know, 21 point, that sounds good. And so what I got now is area text within this shape, whatever shape you want. I mean, this one isn't too fancy. It's just a typical rectangle. This one's kind of interesting though. We've got a circle, and we can make that however we want, really. Just affect the size and really whatever we want to do. Might look a little bit better if we do justified in here in the circle, and that way we see kind of the whole bounding box area. But let's, now if I take the direct selection tool and I want to change this background, and I want to change maybe this background, I have to use that white arrow tool, direct select, and select any point is fine, and then we'll just kind of choose a background, whatever shows that color already, then we'll do a different one. But if you notice right now, there's no margin. Hold on just a sec, let me briefly tend to something. All right, I'm back. Picking up where we left off here. Sorry about that. Should be no more interruptions, but. All right, so here, if we look at this, we've got this box, but we've got no margin here. It's like right up against the edge. Now, sometimes we want that, maybe, depending on the project, but a lot of times we don't want that. And what we'll want to do then is create what's called an inset margin. So pretty easy to do. You just go into the type menu up here, and area type options is what I want, but it's grayed out. I don't know why it's got this. I have to use the black arrow tool or the regular select. So we've got that whole thing selected. Now it should be, yeah, so now we can access it. Area type options, and it's called inset spacing, offset spacing, whatever. It might vary the term, but inset margin is a commonly used name for this. You're just going to add a margin to whatever shape you're using. So this, I'm just going to click it up. Nothing happened because we don't have preview checked, but you can see this come in here, and you can see we've got this border on the edge. So now we can pull that out. So now we've got margin on that one. Go up and do this one as well. Type, make sure we got the black arrow, area type options, what it's called. This ought to be selected by default. For some reason it isn't. We'll just check it. Again, I'm gonna just increase that until it's what I want. 0.25 looks good. So now that's our inset margin here. It's the same on this, same at the top. Same over here. I have this justified. That's the other one I didn't. Justified usually puts weird spacing. So sometimes it works. Depends on the word number of words and the words per line. This looks okay. It's not sacrificing readability too much, but let's say that I want it to conform to that shape a little more. I might want this option here, which is justify. I could also maybe try like a centered, and then that way you get this kind of a weird edge on both sides. I don't really like this because, as I was mentioning before, you don't come back when you're reading it to that same line. So I like this because when your eye comes back here, it goes to the same line. It starts at the same place every time. Ending, if you watch your eye scan these lines, pretending that it actually says something, it doesn't really matter. But when you come back to that same point, it just makes it easier for your eye to read. This on these settings here, a little bit harder to read, but it looks a lot better in this case. You know, let's say I wanted to do something like that. So any shape we can use, we can just put text in here and create an inset margin for it. Say background, we're going to turn that one a different color, slightly different. See, we ideally don't want to run our text right up to the edge. Again, if it's your own experimental thing that you're doing, maybe you can do that, but many times it's not, especially in these classes, because we're trying to learn more traditional ways of handling things first. So here we'll just go ahead and type. Make sure you don't use the white arrow. That's the second time I've done that. So type, and is that not doing it? Type, there we go. Area type options. Preview, and let's bump this in a bit. So let's say, you know, we've got a bunch of these on here. We've got our margins set, and they're all consistent. We've got our copy set. That would be one way to kind of handle. Let's say we had a title at the top. And you know, in this case, it's symmetrical circle. This would actually work well centered, and I could do all caps, and we could maybe add some tracking to it, to our title. Let's go bold and black in this case. So, you know, that's how you'd want to set up those text boxes, like on those, you know, it's not just the project we just looked at, so it's not just assessment 3 with the media types, but also the family tree or any other project where you're putting text within a box like this. So, you know, keep in mind that option. I won't do it in InDesign just because it's kind of a source hog as far as when I open all of my programs at the same time. I seem to run into problems more often than not. So there is a similar setting in InDesign. If you want, you can Google that. You know, inset margins, how to use inset margins in InDesign, something like that. But that's how you do it in Illustrator, and it's really quite easy, really common. So you probably could find it, figure it out without even looking it up. But if you want to look it up, inset margin in InDesign, you can also do that. So that's hopefully give you some idea in terms of how to make these boxes that we're looking at here, because a lot of people had issues with it, and keeping all those the same. If there's a white space underneath cons and pros here, then there should be that same white space underneath pros and cons here. They did on this one, but not over here. So there's a lot of those inconsistencies that people are doing, even here on the same one, the same color pros, and then cons has space below it. Strategies running right up against the edge, but here it's not so much. Here we're clear down at the bottom. A lot of people did this on these assignments this week, or assessments, I mean. So to fix that, all you'd have to do is create one of these. So I said I'd do a really quick kind of demonstration of the inset margin while using Illustrator. And it's really similar with InDesign. It's a little bit different, but it just involves setting that margin in your box and just creating every single instance so that it goes by that, so that here's a new instance, and want to go all content, all new. So here's more of this. So let's say we've got all of these. Look at this again. You create them. Just what I would do is what I just did there is just base it on whatever style. Like maybe we put a stroke on this. Let's say it's just a really small one, make 3 points maybe. And so there's how I would do a bunch of things like that. Because otherwise you're going to just kind of guess at everything, and you can tell when you're guessing because those are not all in the same spot. They're all kind of floating around, jumping around. Now, that earlier project, if you do it drastically enough and it looks like it's obvious that you're meaning to do that floating kind of spacey, random looking placement of typography, you can do that, but you got to make sure you follow that some sort of a standard throughout your whole project. Like this looks like it's trying to, he's got a lot of information, so that's good. And I like how he's got this color coordinated, how he's grouped it, how it's starting, but it's looking kind of busy. And the main thing that is really throwing it off for me is just these inconsistencies in the typography and how some of this overrides the edge and some of it runs right into it, and some has all kinds of space and space below the headings. All that should be consistent. And just setting this up once, you can also set up like a style and just stick with it throughout the rest of your piece. Let's say more space. You want more space like that for the title. You just make sure you do it every single time. So if you're using some of those key features that Illustrator provides, then this becomes a little bit easier. And even if you change things, let's say we make this title one, let's make it 2 lines, and title again. So our title is up to 2 lines. It's just now you're working with it. Hopefully you can see the benefit that you're working with it as a text element, like you would with a normal, like even if I just went here and used the normal text tool. And it was more like just regular text. It just text, the text tool is a whole lot easier to use consistently than trying to just kind of wing it and just move everything manually. So if you use some of those basic text tools in this area, you're going to have a much easier time keeping things consistent than having to just go in and move everything, separately. So even if it goes one line, we're okay. We have the same amount of space below it. So you can see now much more consistent going on with these. And if we have to do a third, let's say another. Okay, so you get the idea, but that is a lot easier to manage than just trying like to do this on these boxes. Something like this is going to get tough. And let's say we did another title in here, lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum dolor. This is what I think people are doing, is they'll just kind of space things out rather than use the type tools. And it doesn't make it easier. It makes it easier on the one, maybe. Or I don't even think it makes it easier on the one, but you got your one that works here, but like when you update it, if you don't use, for example, your area type, and you set that inset margin the same, consistent. That first box looks good. What happens when you have to change something? What happens if this goes too long? Or, like you have another title that comes in later. The first 3-word title is easy, but let's say this one is a 2-line title. It's the only way that it's going to work is if it was 2 lines. Well, you got to go here, and then you got to bring this down. Let me make the point a little better. So this is what I think is happening with a lot of these. They're just, you're not using those basic type tools that Illustrator is providing you. So it's creating some problems like this. Like later, let's say we want a 2-line title. And oh, well, now we've got to move this down manually. How far did it go? So you're asking yourself, trying to work out things here in a way manually that's causing you trouble, that leads to stuff like this, right? Things that are spaced uneven. They got a ton of space down here, but they're hugging the top or they're bumping into the side. All that inconsistency easily solved if we use those tools, for example, that are in the type menu. Once again, area type options. The reason why it's gray is because you have to select it. If you're selected on any shape you want. In fact, look, you can even do this. Take the white arrow to look at the back tool. You can do anything you want here, and your text will just conform to it. Now, keep in mind that this is justified text, and it's going to look horrible unless we give it like a certain amount of characters, or in this case, maybe it's easier to look at it unless we give it a certain amount of words. I usually like to say 7 to 10, typically good per line. So what do we have now on this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's pretty good. And you can see our spacing for this justified setting. Oh, maybe that's not justified. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's justified setting. So the just left aligned, flush left, looks pretty similar, but you get more of a space, kind of ragged edge here. And if I'm wanting it to conform to a shape, so I'm using inset margin, I probably want this option over here most of the time, because that's going to give me a nice clean shape on both sides. More often than not. Maybe if I'm doing something like this, I don't really mind so much, but maybe if I'm doing shapes like circles and these kind of shapes like this, I probably choose that setting, that justified align left, or really any of these. It just align right would just be relevant to that last line. I don't think that looks good. I don't think that looks good. Align left looks good, but yeah, it's something you'd want to practice with. So I think anyways, when you start doing this kind of manual adjustment and how much space is below the line, you start having to guess a lot. And sometimes you can do things, depending on the project, again, you can do things like put a little gauge in there, and that can indicate, baseline to maybe it's X height on the line below it. So baseline to X height, let's say I want to do that. So that could be a workaround solution, but that's going to take a lot more work. I mean, that's going to be really time consuming. You can do it that way technically, but clients come in with changes and creative directors come in with changes. You want to make this as easy to update as possible, and I would not advise this if you have a lot of copy. Maybe you can work a solution like this if it's a minimal amount of copy, but if you have a significant amount of copy, just go with this and you'll thank yourself later for having just done that method rather than adjusting it all manually. All right, so any questions on inset margin, working with those? Okay, no questions. All right, good. Let's look at the assignment. And send me an email. We can go over these tomorrow. We're kind of running short on time. If you want to see yours in class, send me an email today or tomorrow, preferably before noon, and I can go over it probably early tomorrow, beginning of class. All right, this is Connie's project. She sent me this earlier. And I think she's changed quite a bit. So, it looks good. Connie, that's coming along pretty well, I think. Few minor things really, just like the fact that we can see grandma is right along that bottom here. So what I would suggest doing in this case is ignoring the fact that there's a descender here. Again, this is inset margin as well. What I would do, I guess I can show this really quick too. Let's say you've got, probably gonna just, yeah, I'll just go grandma, grandpa. So grandma and grandpa and grandma does not have a descender, and grandpa does have a descender. So, well, hers were white. Why don't we make this white then? And also, we can change it to a different font. Don't have to be exactly the same, but I'll just do like some kind of a serif font here. Garmin, that'll work. And paragraph, let's center those and go inset margin type. And before I do this, I'll save a copy of this first. Type area options, same old deal. Got to check preview, and we'll bump this up until it's right about in the center. 1.88 looks good. So that's how you'd want to treat those. Instead, let's see how you've got the baseline running right along here, and grandpa has more space because there's a descender. So have grandma have that same amount of margin. So ignore the fact that grandma doesn't have that descender, the P on this. You know, and it's just little things like that. You can see the white background from the line here. Make sure you use those align panels to align things. But that's how I would recommend lining that up. So not like that. But that's just kind of a general principle. You could do that because you're aligning it on the baseline and you're ignoring the descender. And I guess you could even do that, but if you were to do that, you'd have to make that box the same size. And that would look weird because that doesn't have a descender if you were to put them right next to each other. So make sure they. Yeah, it might work a little bit different in InDesign, but InDesign is really the typographer's choice for things like this. So it would probably be even easier to do it in InDesign. But yeah, you can do inset boxes and do type in there. I think it's going to be a slightly different way of how you would apply it, but yeah, you can definitely make a box in InDesign, and I know InDesign has that area type tool as well, so you can make those shapes, boxes, and it'll be the same thing. It might be called a different name, but yeah, you can definitely. InDesign probably even has more that you can do with it. I wouldn't be surprised. So there's another way of handling this. really that's not so bad. I mean, it looks okay. I tend to opt for this, but it depends. Maybe you want this. Maybe you like that kind of look. Kind of looks like it's like using minimal space, which isn't necessarily wrong, especially if you do it throughout your whole project. So just probably, I guess the best advice to say would be to take it from the baseline and use your margin based on the baseline and the X height. And the easiest way to do that is to just use the, again, the type and then area type options. In design, it's probably going to be a different name, but probably be in that same type menu. So really, I don't want to say, you have to do it this specific way, but hopefully that gives you some options on things that you can do. But you definitely want to make those consistent. Great uncle doesn't have any space below it, but mom and dad have space. So those, even though they don't have descenders, they're still treating those a little bit different. And that may not look like such a big deal in your project, but believe me, when you get this printed and somebody points it out, you'll never forget it, because those are the types of things that really can make or break a project. And it's really worth it to pay that extra attention to those little things because they tend to add up. So treating all those the same, using the alignment panel. All of those things. So the question is, does it need tags because of the placement? Not sure what you mean by that. She put tags on this. I think it needs tags. Just, I think the labels are good. But those just have to be the same and then aligned the same if you're going to go with this style. So yeah, I think even with the placement, you see how that circle doesn't quite touch dad, the label, but like here it overlaps. All those things you want to make consistent. Now, one of the things here again is when you look at all the information that you have to work with, make sure you take the longest one. This is what I like to do. I like to look at, okay, so Shannon Phipps McCarty, and then her date 2000 or 1971 to 2008. That's probably going to be the longest one here, or close to it. So you're going to want to base that size on the longest one there. And then all the others, once you have that established, all the others will fit in no problem. But I think what's going on with a lot of people is they'll, just start moving with whatever one they want to start with kind of randomly, or maybe they'll start with their own. But I think when you look at this and look at any project in terms of what's the longest name here, what's the longest label that I'm going to have to work with, and maybe set that box up first. So when we did this up here, you kind of set up that area type option based on what you're working with, your longest name. So start with your longest name. And then if you have your longest name, all of your other ones will be shorter and they'll fit in the boxes easier. And for that matter, I might do the longest and the shortest, because you don't want, your this one to look like it doesn't have any content in it. So if you take your longest and your shortest, and there's a really big gap, then you might have to figure out, well, what sort of a space saving device can I use? Maybe I can change the shape, or maybe I can add some different, I don't know, pattern or something like that. But if you know what your longest name and your shortest name is in the beginning, that's going to allow you to set your project up and work with it. So, um, you won't run into as many surprises that way. So that's what I would recommend on projects like this. Shortest and the longest. Yeah, it looks like the women's are larger than the men's, but not in all cases, because these are smaller. And really, if you're going to do that, if you want to, for some reason, I don't think you'd want to, in this case, make larger circles for the women than the men. I mean, if you have a reason to, I suppose you can, but there really wouldn't be any reason to in this case, because family tree, it's like, you want I think you'd want them all to be the same size. So if you were to distinguish, I think you'd want to make it even larger than it is. Because again, you don't want it to just be a little bit. Here, this one looks like it's the same as the blue. So it's probably, yeah, so it's more related to having more information. So that goes back to just saying, get your longest name, like your most information that you have to work with, and your shortest. Create those two circles first, like this, create them with this, and then kind of work from there. Work just that way everything else is going to be in between those. So you know that those are going to be your most extremes to work with. So next project, just think of what's my longest name. Let me set that one up first, probably the most important. And what's my shortest name? And how do those look? Is the shortest name going to look void of content? This does a little bit, but it's not too bad. I think it's acceptable. But overall, it's good. I like the background. I think the colors are right. I know you tried quite a bit on this, Connie, so that's good. Just a few of those things, maybe it just takes a while of working with the programs. InDesign has those align features that they're almost exactly the same that they are in Illustrator. Few minor differences, but make sure, like, for example, these are aligned, and those little things, they're small, but they add up. Yeah, the tree's kind of a cool background. I like it. All right, cool. Any other questions, comments? We'll look at a couple more and then wrap things up here. 4 o'clock already. This one was cool. I like this one. Ramon Williams. Well, he did a pretty simple one, but I like what he did here. He's got the 4 levels. He's got superheroes, and the rings for being married. I like the field in the background and the light bursts, and the typography is good. I think he handled it well. I like how he's got this set up. Yeah, it's cool. Awesome is one of the comments. So yeah, this is good. I like the married rings here, the icons. It's easy to read. It's simple. It's to the point, and it works for this. There's another one I liked. Now, this one's a lot more complex, but get it a little larger here. Interesting colors, just kind of the black and gold look. It's got the passed on the halo for icon, and different key symbols here as far as the breakdown. I really like the color scheme. I like the layout's really good. I like the symbols. I don't know why I'd say health problems, but I guess that's all right. But yeah, I mean, it works. It's a lot more. There's a lot more going on with this, and that's good that he went with that. Went with the different layers of. Here, there are different sizes. Another way of distinguishing different hierarchies. I didn't see too much of that, so that's good. So I like that one. All right, maybe we can look at another. Pretty straightforward. Again, a few, just some things with spacing and Illustrator, you know, some of these, you know, if this is an intentional gap, it should be the same size distance as this. I don't think it is, but it's just a little bit more complicated. We've got the key over here, and it's good. I think it just needs a little bit more, some of those small things again, you know, how did that, how can you make it more consistent? All right, let's see. This one was pretty, a lot going on with this one. Almost overwhelming, but I do like that they put a lot of work into it. Again, things like this could be tied together with groups, with backgrounds, kind of colored backgrounds and whatnot. Just so we're not quite so overwhelmed by many different items on the page, and just kind of place there, not quite arbitrarily, but just they're all separated. Nothing's really grouped. A little bit overwhelming. I like them. They put a lot of work into this. I like the icons. I like the typography, but the organization could still use some more work. Mainly what we did earlier with grouping, proximity, that sort of thing could really help this project. Yeah, very fall colors, definitely. But yeah, I think they've got something good going on this. Just need some more. If I had to say one thing, proximity. Work with proximity a little bit more and group those items so that kind of know what we're looking at a little bit more. Arrows kind of going in multiple directions make it really hard to follow, like where exactly we're trying to look at. What is it we're trying to get out of this? So that would be mainly what I'd say on this one, other than, you know, good choice of icons and colors going on there. One last one we'll look at. I like this, very infographic looking. It's almost got like kind of a cold feel to it, but not really. I mean, it was simple. I like the typography. I like the simple colors, the overlapping. It's kind of neat the way they chose to do this. I like it. It almost feels like it could use some sort of imagery or something to, like, even if it was a bunch of faces at the bottom that just like went kind of along the bottom, or a grid of people. It's like a family tree. I just want to see people and faces for some reason. And this almost, I mean, it works, but it's almost like it's almost like it could be a business thing. So that said, I still like it. I still like how they put this together and presented it. Oh, that's you? Okay. That would be cool. You know what? Even if you did use like something warmer, some sort of a family, even like a people playing in the park, or just, it's like when I hear family tree, I want to see people. But so that was my only thing with this. But that, I do like how you put this together. It's kind of a different take than I've seen, and that's good. All right, so I think if there were no more questions, then that's a wrap for today. And also, if anybody has anything they want me to cover tomorrow, make sure you send me an email, preferably before noon. I'll check it, make sure we get that in there. I believe I want to set up some time if anybody wants their project reviewed, to do it at the beginning of class tomorrow. And then I'll go in and do my take on the assessment. So that'll be tomorrow's plan. But anyways, thanks for watching, and have a good rest of the day. We'll see you tomorrow.